Welcome to the Power of Design podcast, where we have inspiring conversations that explore the intersection of architecture, construction, and real estate, so we can understand the dynamics and trends that shape an exciting and powerful built environment. This is your host, Jack Osa. In today's episode of the Power of Design podcast, I have a very special guest. His name is Ernie Munoz. Personally, Ernie has been a mentor and role model for me, not only as a professional, but also as a person. Years ago, I had the pleasure to work for Ernie. He taught me valuable leadership lessons that helped me shape the leader I aspire to be. Ernie is an accomplished architect with an impressive track record of leading teams to deliver high level of design and an impeccable client experience. During our conversation, we talk about business relationships, the importance of technical excellence, and the power of design to improve our lives. This is my conversation with Ernie Munoz. Ernie, welcome to the Power of Design podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing well, Jack. Good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Ernie, you had a long and interesting career working as a designer, architect at multiple design firms. What do you think is the most important aspect of running a successful architecture office?
Well, Jack, I think that it comes down to people and hiring really good people. I think that, in my career, I found the most success coming from having a really good attitude. When I hired people and when I hired you, I think I told you that attitude was much a greater asset to me for you to have and for our company to have than for your talent. And so I think I always really promoted a good attitude, and that was kind of selfish in a way because I'd come in some days and not have a great attitude, but because I taught you guys to have a great attitude, it would be the smiles and the good mornings. And, that's really important to, having a fulfilled, satisfying life and career.
Sure. Yeah. I looked up the other day, something where they talk about the high performance formula for, any professional, and the high performance formula, it's skills plus experience times attitude equals high performance. So, they talk about how you can have all the skills and all the experience you want. They're just adding to who you are. But the real multiplier of how you perform is the attitude.
Attitude, absolutely.
And that makes a lot of sense when you're talking about, dealing internally with your teammates and your own team, and also with clients, how they experience you and the firm you're representing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Ernie, tell me about you. Where did you grow up?
Okay. Well, I grew up in Lubbock, Texas. And from there, I really had a very good childhood, great parents, wonderful parents, as a matter of fact. Went to Texas Tech University, and they have a 5-year program, went 5 years to school there, got married to my wife, Carolyn, as you know, and we moved to Houston. This was in 1976, and Houston was a booming town. I mean, there was so much work going on then, and it was the place to be. And fortunately, got a job there and practiced there for 10 years.
Wow. So did you always knew you wanted to be an architect, or how did you get attracted to architecture?
Yeah, good question. I found out early on. I'm very blessed to have had a conviction of what I wanted to do early on. I think when it really clicked for me was in the 8th grade. I had a shop class, and we were drawing all these different shapes. It was just an exercise we were going through. And about the same time in my English class, we had to write a paper on what we wanted to be. And I asked my shop teacher about, what professions he might suggest I go into. He said, well, you might think about architecture. And my parents had a few architect friends. And I thought, well, I'll just write a paper on it. I got really interested in it, and really 8th grade was when it clicked for me. But I have to say, just backing up a little bit, that my mother was a seamstress, and she loved designing clothes when she could.
Yeah.
And I grew up around Vogue magazine, and just looking at the dresses and the structure of the dresses and all that, it gave me an appreciation, I think, for well-crafted things. And watching her, she really put a lot into what she did. And so I think that really influenced me a lot.
Oh, sure. Did you find yourself remembering that you used to do, playing in a certain way, or, doing things like, I remember in my case, I love to get toys and I will always put them apart. Like I deconstruct the toys and then I will create a new one, mixing it with other toys.
Yes. Well, I like a lot of young boys and girls, I grew up with, building blocks and that sort of thing. And I always enjoyed them. I could work, play for hours with building blocks. And, even, back in the old days, we used to build forts.
Yeah.
And that was always a lot of fun to create something. But yeah, I think that, those things really influence you when you're growing up. You start to lean one way or the other in terms of, where your career might go.
Yeah. And what was the first job that you got as an architect?
As an architect?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good story. So in Lubbock, where I went to school, there's a very robust architecture school there. And so finding an architecture job was not easy. I mean, they were really filled up. And so I worked for an engineer for a number of years. And there was an opening at an architecture firm in Lubbock. I was still in school and went and interviewed, and they really liked the way I lettered. And, those were in the days way before computers, and we did all lettering by hand. And they said, well, you've got a job. And so that was my first job with an architect.
Nice. And what kind of tasks did you have to do?
Really, it was just drawing. They would show me exactly what to draw because I was young, I was still in school. They didn't want me to mess anything up.
Yeah.
And they were very good. I mean, I have to say, they taught me a lot. They taught me a lot of discipline. It was a very quiet studio. There was no talking. I mean, again, this is old school. You came in and you had to be on time, and we had certain breaks and lunch, and in between, you did exactly what they told you to do.
Yeah.
So it was good. I mean, I loved it. I mean, I just felt, very privileged to have a job.
Sure. What kind of projects did you work on?
They mainly did schools. I think when I was there, and I was there for about my last year in college. And so I wasn't there probably maybe a year. And they did high schools, and I worked on a high school. So.
And how about the next job?
So from there, I went to Houston, as I mentioned, and I worked for a firm that a lot of my classmates had gone to work for. And they did apartments, and it was just hammering out one apartment after the next. And it was so different because it wasn't a very disciplined office. We goofed around during the day, and then we'd have to work all night to finish up, and we didn't work hourly. We had a straight wage. So it was like, you just didn't make any money.
It sounds like fun.
But yeah, it was fun, a little immature, but we got through it.
Nice. And at what point did you start, really getting in love with architecture, understanding, materiality? Because at least in my case, every time as I grew and gained more experience, I start like uncovering new layers of what it really means to be an architect.
Yes. Well, I was fortunate after that first job to get another job with a firm in Houston that at the time was doing a lot of the major work. And there were a lot of very gifted designers there, and very thoughtful. And I think that, I always had an appreciation for good design. But I think that being around those people in that office, just the thoughtfulness that went into it.
Yeah.
They really cared about what the outcome of the project was, and they were very successful. So I think that's really the beginning of when I started to merge my appreciation for beauty and creating things with the actuality of actualizing, what the craft was and how much went into it and how much you really had to think about it and care about what you were doing.
Yeah, because I think at first, we really like to see the end result, the spaces, you see the magazines, you see how things look amazing. But then you start uncovering all the work that it takes to get there. And I like that feeling when you start understanding how do you make that work.
Yes.
And then you become part of that. And you're happy because you know that everything you're doing is contributing to that
absolutely
end product.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome. And what was your break point in your career when you started, advancing and realizing that, the architecture is not only being a project architect, not only doing one things, but getting a better understanding of the overall practicing of architecture?
I think for me, it was going to work for Gensler, which was fairly late in my career, quite honestly. I was probably been in the business for almost 20 years. And I had, a very narrow outlook of architecture in some ways. I had always really focused on base building architecture and doing big buildings. I enjoyed large projects. And I realized after going to work for Gensler that design is everything. It's a table, it's a label, it's a chair, it's the design of the carpet. And I think that's when kind of the light went on for me from the standpoint that, it's design is all around us. It affects our lives so much. And it gave me a much, much greater appreciation for architecture. Did a lot of interior design, as you know. And I think that helped me get a little bit more down in the weeds, down in the details. I remember doing a project when I first went to Gensler that was a retail store. It was only, maybe 1,200 square feet. And it was going to go into the new airport at Washington, D.C. It's the Reagan Airport. And I realized that every square inch of that store was going to be seen and touched by thousands of people every day.
Yeah. And
it all had to be right.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like a, 500,000 square foot office building. Not that that's not important, but really you get down on the details and you really realize how much fun it is and how important it is at the same time.
Awesome. I know that typically we start, going into the profession, learning, we start the technicalities, we start drawing, we start understanding, building designs. At what point or how was your transition to really now understand that it's not only about doing the thing, but it's also about managing people, managing budgets, managing clients, which is, the next level of growth in that career?
Yeah. Well, again, when I went to work for Gensler, they were starting an architecture studio in Washington, D.C. And so there were 3 of us that were basically running the architecture studio from scratch. And have to give credit to Gensler for standing behind us through some lean years. But we had to build a studio and we had to be responsible for the budget. And, while working in prior offices, there were budgets and those sorts of things. We really didn't have to manage people that much. But when you're running an entire studio, which very rapidly grew to like 20 people. And when I moved to Charlotte, that studio was 50 people, which is the size of a lot of offices.
Oh, sure.
You start to realize pretty quickly that how important people are to contributing to, the goal and how much you need them. It's not all about you. And I think that's a big lesson about leadership, is that a leader very quickly learns it's not about them. It's about everybody else. It's about your team and taking care of them. And I think that that's when it really started. I started learning how to be a manager, a leader, balancing all those sorts of things. The budgets, the human resources is a big part of it. It's huge part.
Yeah.
Just taking care of people, and people have, different things that come up, and, it's hiring people. That's when I really learned kind of the craft of, looking for people, and really what at the end of the day I really wanted to find, and the type of people I wanted to be around.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So what advice would you give, like a young architect who, let's say, is a project architect, but they want to keep growing and learning and, being considered for that next role of leadership and keep growing within their firm? Well,
there's different roles for different people. And I do want to make that distinction because, there are great followers. We need people. If there were, if we didn't have followers, there'd be no leaders, right?
Right.
So I want young people to understand that you don't have to be a quote unquote leader to be successful. Work at your craft, work at what you enjoy, what you love. But should you decide to be a leader, I think, again, going back, you have to realize that it's not about you. You really need to work on the success of people that are around you. You need to take care of people. You need to show them appreciation. I'm convinced that appreciation is a deep, deep human need, and that as a leader, you need to appreciate the people that are working with you, and you need to take care of them.
Yeah. How do you do when you're at the front end as a leader, and people are expecting direction from you, but who are you taking direction from? How do you keep yourself learning and going to the next level? How do you do that?
Well, I think it's just really taking all of life's experiences. There's not one book or anything. And honestly, I read a lot. But I read about history. I don't read too many leadership books, although, I probably have cases of leadership books that I've read. But I feel like that the things that have influenced me the most in terms of having answers, or at least searching for an answer of how to lead people, is to have seen, how others led. Many of our military leaders, many of our political leaders, spiritual leaders, have done amazing things, and they'll tell you that, they don't have all the answers. Sure. They make mistakes like everyone else, know, and, you just try to just absorb the richness of life and life's experiences. And certainly my parents, I think, had a huge influence on me in terms of, the reasons why I look up to them, because they were very good people.
Sure.
And I think that's another key to, leadership is, you just work on being as good a person as you possibly can.
Yeah. I think, we're usually by default trying to find answers outside of us, on other books, other people, these things. And there is, just overwhelming amount of information in the world. But there is one thing that I think about a lot, and it's, it's like self-confidence. You need to trust in your ability to figure it out. Maybe I don't know how or the right answer, but I need to trust that I can.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And somehow find it and be willing to make mistakes and forgive myself for making those mistakes. Absolutely. And just keep going, because it's impossible just to be very clean and perfect. You're always gonna default to something that you may not be the best at.
That's right. Yeah. That's right.
So you were at Gensler, DC, and what was the next step for you?
So I was in the Gensler office for 7 years. As I mentioned, helped run the architecture studio and grow that from almost scratch to about 50 people. And we were doing very well. I felt like we'd really hit our stride. Interesting story about that is that when we started the studio, everybody in DC really kind of wrote us off because they said, well, Gensler's an interior design firm. They don't do base building work. So really, we were on our toes all the time to prove ourselves. And it took us a while to get there, but we got there doing, really small, insignificant projects and, scattered with some interiors projects, but, for the most part, just scratching our way up and, getting our reputation, which again, going back to the craft is, making sure that our documentation was correct, that we were making really solid relationships, getting good clients. In any event, so fast forward 7 years, the firm asked me to come to Charlotte and work here. The office was growing and had a few bumps in terms of people leaving, et cetera, and needed some help. And so oddly enough, I just one day said, if you guys need me to help in any way in Charlotte, I'd be more than happy to help, because the studio was doing very well in DC. And they kind of like, well, would you move to Charlotte? It really took me aback. But you know what? I'm, a loyal employee. You guys have been good to me, and I trust that, things will work out. And so, we moved to Charlotte in 2004.
Wow.
And, started, we had, I think 12 people were in the office at that time. And we grew that office to 50 when I left to go work with Chad in Raleigh. So, there was some good years here. Probably longer than any other office. I was here for 15 years.
So when you come to a place with that challenge, they're putting a lot of faith in you and responsibility to help it grow, make everything work. Did you have a plan, or how did you figure out what to do and when, and how did you make that happen?
Well, I in retrospect, I wished I had more of a plan in some ways, but I think in other ways, you just kind of go in and, you look at the situation at hand and you start reacting to it. We had a bit of a morale problem in the office, and that was one of the things that I really wanted to work with my partner on in terms of, changing that. We had some personnel changes, which I think were really good for us. So that was number one, because again, it's the attitude. When somebody's really not on board, it's really not a fault of theirs. It's just not the right fit. We've said that many times. It sounds a bit of a cliche, but it's just not. And I'm sure those individuals have gone on, to other firms and done great work, and I hope they have. But we wanted to get that right. Get the office where it was a fun place to come, where, people really wanted to work and had a great attitude, cared about each other, cared about their work. I think one of the things for me also, as far as a plan, was kind of went back to how we started the architecture studio in DC, is we really had to prove ourselves to be a really solid, dependable, trustworthy group. And our business, as you know, one of the ways we do that, one of the ways that's manifested is in doing reliable documents and, making sure that the drawings are correct. If you make a mistake, you own up to it, you fix it. And so, not that they hadn't done that before, I don't really know, but I felt like that we really needed to establish our reputation in Charlotte, even though we weren't the biggest or, the most well-known. I wanted us to be known as a very dependable, reliable firm.
Yeah.
We'll be right back with more from the Power of Design podcast.
The Power of Design podcast is brought to you by OSA Studio, a multidisciplinary design firm focused on creating impactful experiences through the power of design. We partner with our clients to create buildings, interior spaces, brands, and strategies that help you deliver a successful project. As a minority-owned firm, we are committed to building a diverse platform of curious and driven design professionals so we can together pursue our full potential. For more information, please visit us at www.osastudio.com.
Yeah, I think there is a lot on making that happen. There are some things that are, about management, assessing situations and critical thinking. But I think there is a lot of that is art. That is like, your gut feeling,
Yes.
like going with, whatever you may not be sure, but you just kind of know is that way. And for me, it's been interesting that I've been running my business for more than 3 years. How much of that is just instinct?
Absolutely.
Instinct and gut feeling.
Absolutely.
Sometimes you don't have all the information to make the decisions. You just have, some pieces of information, and you just need to, again, trust yourself.
Yeah. There's definitely always that point where you just have to go with your instinct. And, 9 times out of 10, it's the best way to go, because sometimes you may be influenced by somebody else.
Yeah.
And you look back and say, gee, I wished I'd stuck with my instincts on that one, So.
Yeah, I get that a lot when sometimes, when we're service providers and architects selling design, sometimes not every client is a match for you or for your team. And how many times have we made the mistakes of doing something because we like the fee, and 2-3 months down the road, we're like, oh my God, what did we do?
Oh yeah. It's really important. And it's difficult when you're starting. I mean, even though, as with the name architecture firm, we had clients that, weren't great fits for us. I mean, and in fact, in DC, when we were getting started, our very first large commission, we got to a point where we told the client it just was not a good fit for us. And I mean, thankfully, they were completely on board with it. We backed out of it, and we parted ways amicably. But, I think if you can recognize that before you get too far down the road, it's better. But, as you mature and you get more work, then you can be a little bit more choosy about who you want to work with. And I think that's important. I don't think it's selfish at all. I think you're going to do your best work for people you want to work with.
Yeah. Yep. And within what we do, as architects, and this is part of, why the podcast is called The Power of Design, which is, to me, the intersection of design, construction, and real estate. We all need each other to make these spaces happening, because at some points the design team stops. You complete your drawings, your specifications, but we're not building. Yeah, right? You need to pass on that to somebody, other team, and then there is a real estate team. Mm-hmm. There's a real estate team that is helping with financing, making the deals happening. How important is to really be a team player and engage with those other groups that are not our main service?
Oh, I think it's extremely important. Let me start with the contracting side. I believe that is a very, very strong, or should be a very strong partnership. And as you know, my philosophy is always to bring the contractor in as quickly as possible, because they should be a part of, helping determine, what's possible, what falls within the price point that the client is looking to achieve. And then also at the same time, probably more importantly, is that, they have that same passion for and pride in what this product will be. You want them to be as proud of that building as anybody else. Because if they are, they're going to do a great job.
Sure.
And you want to have fun. I mean, these projects can go for 2, 3, 4 years. I mean, the airport, those types of projects go for 5, 10 years. And you just don't want to be miserable for that long of a time. I think that on the real estate side, we aren't engaged with them as much, but the times that I have been engaged with a real estate team, it's been very enjoyable. I wish there was a little bit more, communication there. It historically has not been. But I have to say that the times that we have had that relationship, I think it's been a better project.
Sure.
As a result.
I really focus on that a lot. Part of doing this podcast is focusing on them as well. So I have a lot of people from the construction industry, from the real estate side, because it's very important to understand what are their goals.
Oh yeah.
Right? Because at the end of the day,
no doubt.
Typically in the commercial, construction design world, we have the same client. We all have the same goal, create a great experience for that client and help that client achieve their goals. But we all come from different angles. And I feel that overall in the practice of, construction and delivery, we're very isolated. Right? We're in our design community talking to architects in the AIA and the contractors. They have their own team and brokers and project managers. And we come together in projects and maybe in like networking events, but we don't really form very strong relationships. Right. And that's one of the things that I'm doing with the podcast intentionally is developing a strong relationship with those other players.
Well, I think that's super important. I appreciate you doing the podcast, Jack. I mean, I've listened to probably all of them, and it's a great contribution to, our industry. I think that, if we were to be able to communicate more on the real estate side, and again, when we have, we understand the pressures that they have. I think that's the issue, is that sometimes, we get very myopic when we think, well, gee, the world's, it's all coming down on us. Yeah. And if somebody gets upset or, challenged or whatever, we think, well, that we don't appreciate the pressure that individual, that group of folks is going through, And I think we understand the real estate from architects. We understand them the least, probably. Yes. But when you do get to know them and you do work with them, you understand the issues that they're dealing with, which are tremendous. I mean, there's a lot of money at stake. Oh yeah. And they're being entrusted with a lot. We need to share in that as partners and appreciate what they have to deal with. And when you do, again, you start to support each other. It becomes a team, and it really helps the client. You want the client to just not have to deal with anything. Right. For this to be a great experience. I mean, we sell that when we go for interviews. It's like, this should be a great experience. Oftentimes it's not.
Yep. And I think there is a lot of responsibility in the education of architecture. And I think just because of the nature of architecture, and I see architecture as the perfect combination between art and technique.
Yes.
There is a level of passion that we have. And one of the things that sometimes I think makes architects blind to the overall context is that they think it's their design.
Yes.
This is my building, right? So you fall in love with your creation when it's not yours, because you're not paying for it.
Right.
The client is paying for it. It's their project, it's their design, and you're just, adding value to that piece of the puzzle. And sometimes I see the value of owning and falling in love with things because you get involved, but there is a fine line where you need to stop and you need to realize that it's not yours, it's theirs.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think that's why it's very common in general in society that they think, architects, they just make you waste a lot of money because they want to do these pretty things that you don't really need. And a lot of people do that.
Oh, yeah.
It's very common.
Oh, yeah. Well, it is, and it's an easy trap to fall into. I think it's human nature to want to own something, and when you create something, it's you're taking some risks to share it with people, and then when you do, you can be very sensitive about criticism. But to your point, if you do it as a collective, if you're listening to the client and you're like, okay, this is the client, he's paying for this. I want this to be the very best project for him that it can possibly be. And you bring in the real estate side, you bring the contracting side, and everybody's working together. You start to feel a collective ownership.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if somebody says, well, what if you did this? You don't see it as a criticism. It's like, okay, gosh, that's going to make it better.
Sure.
Because you've got a different perspective on this that I hadn't really been looking at, even the client. I mean, probably the greatest feeling I've ever had, and I've only had it happen a few times, is, a client just say, well, there's nothing to talk about. Go with that. You heard us, and, we love what we're seeing here, and let's just move on.
Yeah.
That's the greatest feeling you can have,
That's
because
right.
you feel like you've checked the box. You know?
You did your part. So, with all your experience, and with the impact of technology in architecture and construction, the things keep like accelerating and evolving really fast. We have, like 3D printing and BIM and all these things. Yeah. And you have lived through all the transition of how we change the way we create architecture, create buildings. What would you say will be the future of the design and construction industry, 10, 20 years down the road? There's a lot of talks about, we have talked about design build and integrated project delivery, but they haven't really taken off.
Yeah.
What do you think is going to be the future of our profession?
It's hard to say, Jack. I've thought about it, and, we've had some, just kind of casual discussions about it. Will probably gradually change. To me, I've seen a lot of transition. Like I said, my first job was, I got because I could letter well.
Yes.
Everybody drew by hand, right? Computers were, for, science and going to space. But, looking back on it, we've had a lot of changes over the years. I think but at the same time, we're still doing a lot of things the same way.
Yeah.
And I feel like that somebody's going to come along like an Elon Musk, that's going to say, you guys have this all wrong. And it probably won't be an architect.
Sure.
You can make this a lot easier.
Yeah, it's going to be a tech guy.
Yeah, no doubt. I think that could very well happen. It may not, but I think it could very well happen, because it seems like there's a lot of things that we make it harder than it really should be. I do think that it will evolve to more of a collective, and I don't know in what form. I sense that there will be small firms and very large firms, and the ones that we won't be seeing, with the 50-man firms too much anymore. They'll get bought out by the large firms. Mm-hmm. And there'll always be small firms. There'll always be people that, 1, 2 man or women shops, which is great. I don't know that it's all bad. I just, I hope it doesn't get institutionalized, if you will.
Sure. Yeah. No, I think there are a lot of things, people talk about 3D printing, like in massive scales, like printing whole buildings, or, designing cities in other planets, things like that. I think we really need, as architects and designers, we need to keep up
Yes.
with technology and what are these other tools, because otherwise somebody else is gonna lead it.
No doubt.
That's very common.
No doubt.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, what we're doing is creating spaces for other humans to perform their life, different activities.
Yep.
And that can happen with, any other material and any other way. We're just thinking about the future, how that might be, and helping create that happen, that happen.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how attitudes change coming out of the pandemic. I think, this is a cataclysmic event. And I think that, hopefully it'll have a positive effect, at the end of the day. I mean, I feel like that, doing a lot of corporate interiors, we were just kind of like, seeing the same thing over and over and over, it gets a little monotonous.
Yeah.
It's like, where's the creativity, now we're kind of we'll probably be forced to change.
Yeah.
Which again, hopefully it will be for the better.
Sure. Ernie, how does the power of design impact who you are and what you do?
I think it impacts a lot of how I look at the world. As I go back to, what I'd said earlier about the Vogue magazine, I think that, you just, certain people, I don't know that everybody's this way. I think everybody has a certain amount of it, but some of us more than the others, is just finding beauty in the world. You know, nature, of course, is easy because it's beautiful. It's, God's perfect. And, it's like you can't, improve on that. But, just small things, like how a magazine is put together. You do a lot of graphic work, and, when you see something that's just perfectly, crafted, it's the text is just right, it's just balanced. And
and there is like a joy when you see that. I have a bunch of websites that I want to visit all the time, like architecture or design. And my wife is like, don't you get tired just looking at that? The same thing, like these buildings of like, no, like I'm enjoying seeing this. Like it's awesome.
Pinterest can really eat up your time. Yeah. It is.
Nice. And I guess, I just want you to clarify, when you were looking at the Vogue magazines, you were looking at the designs, not the women.
Absolutely. Just the designs. No, and
you were ignoring that.
Again, it's one of those types of things where, it's, I guess I'm old school, but when people take care of themselves and want to look nice, it's evident,
Oh, yeah.
And it's just the whole thing. I think that, when you look at a magazine that someone has clearly crafted and really wanted it to be just right. The editors of Vogue magazine, were after a certain thing, and it's just like our work too. I think successful people are able to take their client to a different place, right? Where you just feel good. And that's one of the things, you were with me in a number of those pitches, it's like, we want you to step out of that elevator and just every morning and feel great.
Yeah.
It takes you to a different place. The world isn't perfect, but you go to your office and this is great. You know,
you have a moment that is special.
Yeah. And it's just like any other thing, it's just like a well-crafted table or a chair, it's just kind of like, okay, let's let all the worries of the world go somewhere else,
Yeah. Well, Ernie, thank you so much for your time today.
Absolutely.
And also want to take the opportunity, to thank you for everything that you have shared with me. I've told you before, you have been my boss, but a lot more than that. I think you're a role model, as a professional and as a person. And I really appreciate your openness and your willingness to share all your wisdom with me.
Well, thank you, Jack. It's been a pleasure. And it was always a pleasure working with you. I love coming in the morning, and I talked about attitude and would ask you, how are you doing? And the answer was always excellent.
That's right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ernie. Thank you for listening to the Power of Design podcast. Remember to rate and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Find out more about Jack and Osa Studio at osastudio.com and follow us on Instagram at The Power of Design Podcast. Thank you.